Good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to our panel discussion dealing with the expectations for the Berlin Process Summit 2021. My name is Simonida Kacarska. I run the European Policy Institute in Skopje, and I was kindly asked by the organizers, the Aspen Institute and Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft, to moderate today's session with our high-level speaker, the State Secretary at the German Federal Foreign Office, Miguel Berger, who I'm very grateful for his participation. During this panel, we will hear what was discussed over the 2 days on the working groups. We will hear the policy recommendations as well as the expectations from the Berlin Process Summit. We have designated rapporteurs that will report from all of the 10 working groups that have been working hard over the last 2 days. Which means that we have a lot of topics to cover. But first, to start off the discussion, I will give the State Secretary a couple of minutes for his welcoming remarks, thanking him again, because this, for us from civil society, is one of the most important sessions where we bring our recommendations directly to the policymakers. State Secretary, the floor is yours.
So I hope you can hear me.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Yeah. So Ms. Kacarska, thank you very much for the introduction. And yeah, it's a pleasure for me to be here in this virtual meeting with you. And if I understand it correctly, this is the last panel of the 1.5 days or 2 days of work in the civil society and think tank forum. And really great thanks to all the participants for their contributions. And I'm really looking forward to listen to the outcome, to the results of the different working groups. And so also a big thanks to Aspen Institute, Germany, to the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft, the Southeast Europe Association, for the joint organization of the forum. And as you know, this civil society think tank forum marks the beginning of this year's round of the Berlin Process meetings, something we started 7 years ago with the Berlin Process. And the objective is and has been to unlock, I would say, the potential of the region, to strengthen the connectivity, but above all to strengthen regional cooperation. And from the beginning, our intention has been not to have only, I would say, academic discussions on topics, but to create a real impact on the ground, and to give answer to questions about everybody's life and people's life, and how to improve that concretely. And if we look back the last 7 years, I think there are some areas where we have achieved something really visible. The creation of the youth cooperation, some very important infrastructure projects, the commitment to the common regional market that was done last year, although we still have some challenges in the implementation. And in our view, this Berlin process is also really about ownership. That it's necessary that everybody has to understand that it's their task also to drive the issues forward. And I think regional cooperation, for example, the moderation with the Regional Cooperation Council, and I just talked to I think she's called Secretary General of the RCC. I talked with her some days ago on where we stand on the implementation, and I would say progress is slow, but I really hope that we can give some of the issues a push. When I think about the free travel of people with ID cards, I think that's a basic issue. the unified visa area, the recognition of academic and professional qualifications. All of these issues would have a real impact. And there is one issue which was also widely discussed in the European Union during the pandemic, which is the question of the so-called green lanes, which allow traffic to move forward despite maybe some COVID regulations. And also here, I think we still need to make some progress. And so in our view, this question of people-to-people cooperation, which is crucial, give new economic perspectives, especially after the pandemic. If I think about the brain drain from the region, which is really a serious, I would say, also impediment for the further development. So it shows that we need to do something there. And then issues we always take up, free and diverse media, minority rights, which need to be assured, the space for civil society and NGOs. And let me underline here to all participants that the Civil Society Forum is for us much more than a side event of the process. In our view, this is really a key pillar. So the ideas which come out of the discussion, they will be presented and discussed with the foreign ministers in their meeting on the 8th of June, which is something I think very positive. And I have seen that you have set yourself really an ambitious agenda with these 10 workshops and some of the very pertinent topics. So really let us see how we can move forward together. And now I'm very interested to listen to the outcome of your deliberations.
Thank you, Secretary Berger. Thank you very much for mentioning the ownership, because I think that what we're about to hear in this panel is specifically the view from the region and from some of the activists that have been working on these topics for a very long period of time. Just a couple of housekeeping remarks after those inspiring words. We will work in 4 clusters for this session. So we've organized the 10 groups in 4 clusters. And I would kindly ask the colleagues who are presenting, who I will announce, to turn on their cameras when they are speaking. After each of the clusters, I will give an opportunity to Secretary Berger to respond to any immediate questions. And then at the end, let's hope that we will have enough time for discussion. Each of the speakers will have 5 minutes, and I was told that I need to be very strict on that. The first group that will present brings a summary of the results of the group on the future of the EU in the Western Balkans, the role of civil society in strengthening democracy, and countering disinformation and strengthening media independence. First, I will give the floor to Milena Lazarevic from the Think for Europe Network and the Center for European Policy in Belgrade to update us on the discussions on the future of the EU in the Western Balkans. Milena, please do turn on your camera, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, my dear Simonida, State Secretary Berger. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So in our working group over the course of yesterday and today, the discussion has focused mainly on the role of the European Union and its member states, which unfortunately is clearly showing that civil society has rather low expectations from national governments in the Western Balkans and is really pleading for help from EU partners in fulfilling its controlling mission, but also its mission of substantively supporting the EU accession of the region. Yet we have come up with recommendations to the EU, to the civil society organizations themselves, and to the Western Balkan governments. To start with the recommendations towards EU institutions and member states. Well, first of all, outstanding issues, which are now dubbed as bilateral issues currently blocking the enlargement process for certain Western Balkan countries, should be reframed as issues affecting the entire foreign and enlargement policies of the European Union, and thus no longer be tolerated as bilateral issues. The EU should also be coherent and consistent in communications on all levels, from the technical to the highest political level, avoiding glorification of national political elites when it is not merited, and where there are clear rule of law, human rights, and/or democracy problems on the ground. The EU should revise its approach to monitoring progress and level of preparedness by developing a coherent, quantified assessment methodology that would be applied in the same way to all candidates and potential candidates. It should also maximize transparency of the enlargement policy and consequently help the transparency of the accession processes of our countries and civil society's efforts to monitor the process, as well as reduce executive bias in the process by strengthening the role of parliaments and civil societies, even judiciaries, in the process. The EU should also reform its funding schemes to make them work more from the bottom up and thus help avoid inadvertently entrenched state capture. It should also ensure continued engagement with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo and maintain their EU perspective while keeping in line with the spirit of the new negotiation strategy. The EU should also tap the full potential of differentiated integration in further developing and rethinking its approach to enlargement, albeit ensuring that the finalité of the process remains full membership and offering Western Balkan countries the option of phased membership rather than imposing it. The EU should also develop an all-encompassing approach towards better integrating the Western Balkans into its policies aimed at strengthening Europe's strategic autonomy. And last but not least, the EU should include the region to a greater extent in its conference on the future of Europe. To civil society organizations, first of all, we recommend to continue and step up the demands for our own meaningful inclusion in the accession process and negotiations, as well as full transparency of the process. We should also engage deeply in monitoring reforms on the ground and proactively advocate results and findings of such monitoring to both our governments and EU institutions and member states, but also communicate and engage more proactively with the public in our countries on these issues. We should engage in deeper and wider regional collaboration, peer learning, as well as thus help creating positive peer pressure among governments by benchmarking performances across the region. We should engage in wider and deeper collaboration with civil society from EU member states. To our national governments, we recommend, first of all, to refrain from using negative and destructive political rhetoric towards the EU and the integration process, at least as long as the formal and written national strategic objective is achievement of EU membership. Political discourse towards the EU needs to be in line with those objectives. In countries with positive discourse, communication needs to be improved and more substantive, focusing also on the social dimension of the process. National parliaments should be given a greater role in the accession and negotiation procedures and should be invited to regularly discuss and monitor implementation of recommendations from the EU progress reports. The national governments should commit, alongside the EU institutions and member states, to full transparency of the EU integration processes and procedures, as EU accession is not a mere negotiation on an international agreement, but a process of deep societal and governmental transformation that affects us all. And finally, the governments should be more proactive in creating and pushing for joint regional initiatives related to the advancement of the EU accession process, thus amplifying the voice of the region towards the EU in recognition of the common interest of integrating the region fully into the Union. Thank you very much, and I'm open for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Milana, and thank you for sticking to the time. It was quite refreshing to start with the future of the EU in the Western Balkans. This is probably the discussion on those fundamentals that we are discussing, but including our European future as well. The second speaker is Misha Popovic from the Institute for Democracy, Societas Civilis, who's going to update us on the role of civil society in strengthening democracy. Misha, your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Simonida. State Secretary Berger. We would like to stress that economic cooperation and convergence cannot precede the democratic infrastructure, and we cannot disentangle these two processes. The countries are interdependent in multitude of ways, and problems in democracy in one country affect the progress in others. Dysfunctionality in the institutions creates a spiral for supporting quick fixes delivered by political strongmen who often disregard the democratic or the due process in the decision making. So covidocracy is but the latest embodiment of such practices, where checks and balances are replaced by the hand of strong or resolute leaders. So in a situation where less democratic shortcuts in governance are in favor, civil society operates in a difficult and often hostile environment, in some countries slowly being pushed out of the public space. But the role of civil society is to find ways and contribute to democratization by advocating in favor of its constituents. It needs to reinforce these bonds and acquire new avenues of drawing its legitimacy and stimulate demand among citizens for better governance. So civil society needs to change the narratives and have more direct relationships with the citizens, talk more with citizens before talking with governments. This means mutual engagement between grassroots capacity builders, watchdogs, and think tanks about issues that have tangible importance to the everyday life of citizens, like issues of environment or healthcare. By working together, they can secure victories against established corrupt interests and autocrats. We need also to work on planting the seeds for the next generation of activists. They find ways to engage citizens outside of the established civil society, so we need to build their capacity and enable them to have more impact. These new initiatives situated in the communities can safeguard against the growing effect of civic disengagement, rise of extreme and populist groups, which seemingly act in popular interest. As CSOs, we need to build solid information platforms and communication paradigms where CSOs can overcome media barriers and disinformation and directly engage citizens and build their demand for the important issues. Without citizens, we cannot put sustainable pressure against the political establishments. So to succeed in this, the EU needs to adjust the assistance to the civil society and invest in organizations instead of projects. The EU assistance is currently the most administrative burdensome aid scheme in the Western Balkans. CSOs need flexible support to adapt to the continuously changing political space and not spend time to complete projects which in the meantime might be less important than ongoing issues. The EU and the member states must be guided by values whilst engaging the region and should provide the necessary means for CSOs to operate preserving these values first before going on to cooperate and work with governments on institution building, which is the current ongoing paradigm of the EU engagement with the Western Balkan civil society. Thank you.
Thank you, Misha, for being to the point and being on time as well. Our last speaker in this cluster is Nicola Burazar from the Center for Contemporary Politics in Belgrade. He is going to update us on what the working group dealing with countering disinformation and strengthening media independence worked on. Nicola, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Simonida. I have the honor to present the recommendations from this working group, and I believe the topics we have touched upon are quite of big importance in the Western Balkans, also for other questions such as democratization and regional cooperation. Let me begin by assessing, or let's say, by mentioning here the problems which we have found to be the most pressing ones in the Western Balkans that the governments need to deal with. The first question is the question of transparency of ownership and financing, and maybe one of the fundamental problems when it comes to functioning of media in the Western Balkans. The second is the question of the role of the state in the media sphere and the funding coming from the state, but also other ways the state regulates the media, and the importance of limiting the role of the state and basically putting the state in the situation where it is going to support media's reporting in the public interest and establishing conditions for a fair media market. Of course, what's the problem is the lack of rule of law when it comes to implementation of legal provisions on media, and this is certainly something that needs to be improved. Now we come to two very important questions. One is the independence and capacity of the public broadcasters. which often lack independence and lack capacities to fulfill their designated roles. And both funding and independence of the public broadcasters needs to be improved in order for them to fulfill their designated role. The second is the question of the media regulatory bodies, which have very wide competences in different Western Balkan countries, but which often lack both independence and financial capacities to fulfill this role. And we want to accentuate this particular problem as very important for the entire region. Then, of course, you have the problem of attacks on journalists and threats against journalists, sometimes coming from the governments themselves. In that sense, the governments must refrain from attacking journalists and labeling them as political opponents. But also the appropriate institutions need to promptly deal with the questions of attacks on journalists and media as a matter of priority, and all prior cases of murders of journalists should be resolved as soon as possible. Of course, the problem of media literacy is also of big importance, especially when it comes to the problem of disinformation, which is plaguing the entire region, and the state should also be involved in resolving this problem. Now, when it comes to the role of the EU and how the EU can support media freedom and help fight disinformation in the region, we have two, let's say, sets of recommendations. The first ones are of general nature. So what can the EU do systematically to help this problem? Well, we believe that the EU should be more vocal about the importance of media freedom in the Western Balkans and should not refrain from naming and shaming of governments. The second is that the EU should design new instruments to monitor and assess media freedom, such as the special reports on media freedom, similarly to as currently exists for chapters 23 and 24. And also when it comes to cases of serious problems with media freedom, which may result in political crisis, the EU should commission senior expert group reports on media freedom in a similar fashion as was done with the rule of law in North Macedonia with the so-called Pribe report, and then later on insist on meaningful improvements of the questions assessed within the report. When it comes to more specific ways that the EU and the member states can help media freedom in the Western Balkans directly, for sure there is a question of financially supporting independent media. And what is definitely important is that the EU should help Western Balkan media create sustainable business models, but also directly finance them during the transition period, as the implementation of new business models is not possible in the short term. Also, the EU and member states should especially focus on supporting investigative journalists, young journalists, women journalists, and local and minority media, which are increasingly threatened around the region. Also, the EU should definitely focus on supporting media literacy programs as a means to help fight disinformation in the region, and the civil society also has a big role to play in this regard. And of course, finally, the EU should support the civil society and the links between the media and the civil society, as well as regional media cooperation to fight disinformation in the region. And last but not least, the EU and the member states should support media self-regulation mechanisms, which is something which is currently underdeveloped in the Western Balkans and should be worked on by the civil society, but it surely needs EU support. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you to all three speakers from this cluster of working groups. Secretary Berger, would you like to respond immediately to any of the issues?
Yeah, with pleasure, and really thanks to the three of you. I think you touched upon very, very important topics. I wanted to ask if what you have presented will also be presented in writing, because there were many ideas, and obviously we have to condensate everything a lot. And if I start with the last point, disinformation, yes, this is, you know, to strengthen the resilience against disinformation is also a topic here. I can tell you, with the upcoming German elections, we see a lot of disinformation activity which is going on, and to strengthen the resilience here is crucial. And I take your point, which I think is really important, to say the EU should be more vocal, not only on that, on media, but also to have a kind of monitoring mechanism. maybe we should here look also to the OSCE in Vienna, because they have one of the institutions in the OSCE is on media and on journalists and against attacks on journalists. And I think that this is also an instrument we have to use. And absolutely crucial, the question of public broadcasters, the question of state media, the role of the state overall in the media sector. Because as we all know, it's extremely difficult to develop civil society and bring democracy forward if the media sector is not pluralistic and is not free. So very much supportive on what you said. And I also take very serious the points on civil society. And, you know, for us, the interaction with civil society is a day-to-day work here in our ministry. On many, many topics, we exchange views with civil society. And obviously, civil society organizations need to be based on real citizen support. But if that is guaranteed, I think then they are also a valid interlocutor for governments. And I see with concern what you said about civil society being pushed out of many debates. And the areas you mentioned, environment, health, many areas where I think that civil society can play a leading role. Yes, and Ms. Lazarevich, I think you will have the possibility to speak to ministers directly, which is great. And my recommendation would be really bring these points also to them. And I agree with what you said, that bilateral issues should not be allowed to stop progress. And, you know, under our German presidency, we did a lot, for example, to try to bridge differences between Northern Macedonia and Bulgaria in order to move the process forward. This should not be tolerated, and I agree with that. And I can't answer really the question about the role of parliaments, but how strong that is, but I share the point. And I can tell you here in Germany, the role of parliament is very strong. So Parliament is fully involved in the whole discussion, for example, on EU enlargement, on accession talks. All of that is a debate which is very intensively taking place. Conference of the Future of Europe, yes. And this is our objective, to include the whole of the Western Balkans into the discussion of the Conference of the Future of Europe, and also on strategic autonomy. We have to see how we can organize it, maybe with one or two other EU member states, but we are really keen to organize civil society conference on the future of Europe, which includes the Western Balkans. So thank you also for your recommendations.
Thank you, State Secretary. I would like to thank the three speakers from our first cluster, and I would like to invite our second cluster of working groups, which deals with addressing legacies of the past and regional confidence building and acceptance and rights of minorities in the Western Balkans. We will first start with Group A, with Branka Vierda from the Youth Initiative for Human Rights from Croatia and Marko Milosavljević from the Youth Initiative for Human Rights from Serbia. Branka and Marko have kindly agreed to share those 5 minutes. So Branka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simonida. Hello, everyone, respected State Secretary Mr. Berger and respected audience. Working group addressing legacies of the past and regional confidence building created recommendations which will Youth Initiative for Human Rights present. First of all, recommendations for CSOs and think tanks from the Western Balkans. Since regional confidence building is a slow, intense, and long-term process, CSOs and think tanks must work hard to develop new approaches in order to contribute to reconciliation processes and sustainable peace in this region. One way to achieve this is through multidisciplinary cooperation between different types of NGOs, which nurture human rights in the area and understand how important it is to raise human rights standards, and grassroots initiatives from local areas which have direct experience in fieldwork. Strong cooperation between CSOs and think tanks must be extended by adding new types of partners, such as academic institutions, having in mind that the role and expertise of CSOs in this area is strictly focused on truth-seeking processes. The availability of facts and data is a necessary condition for strong and relevant advocacy. Marco?
Thank you, Branka. Thank you, State Secretary, and dear Simona. So, recommendation for Western Balkan governments is that actually we are expecting that reconciliation and development of sustainable peace must be perceived as an issue of importance both on the national and on the regional level. Therefore, the countries belonging to the region, including Croatia and Slovenia and also Albania, should strongly support close cooperation. What we accepting is that especially Croatia needs to take a leadership role in reconciliation process, not contra. Also what we in order to create multilateral public policies and reconciliation agendas, which will comprehensively represent the recognition of the importance and strong commitment to fostering social development and strong values and responsible dealing with the past. Secondly, independent media are the crucial partner in the processes of responsible dealing with the past. Therefore, a strong support for critical journalism and the protection of freedom of speech is utmost importance in providing the public with uncensored information about the atrocities and the human rights violations that occurred during the recent conflicts in the region and unaddressed human rights violation from preceding regimes. Also, one way to contribute, not just mutual education, but also multicultural cooperation could be a regional exchange of the journalists. And on the end, the recommendation for the EU and the member states, they need to provide targeted grants for cross-border and regional programs, including, as I said, Croatia, Slovenia, and Albania to support joint reconciliation and peace-building activities. Grants should support a culture of accountability and social cohesion. Also, impose zero tolerance for hate speech and attacks on peace activists and the media. This would include withholding financial, political, and operational support to candidate states by European institutions and the member states. Also, the EU policy of conditionality towards candidate states should encompass transitional and also restorative justice mechanism. In conjunctions with criminal justice mechanisms, include non-judicial dimensions of DJ, which is actually forgotten, such as reparation, truth-seeking, and memorization during the monitoring period. And on the end, it's crucial that this process is followed by concrete, sincere, active, and effective push by national institutions to truly recognize and develop public policies that are oriented towards peace building. Thank you.
Thank you both. Our second rapporteur is Suad Skenderi from the Institute for Research and Policy Analysis, Romelitico, who will update us on what was discussed in the working group on acceptance and rights of minorities in the Western Balkans. Suad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simonida. Honorable State Secretary Berger, thank you for joining in. It is crucial for us and the working group to be part of this process. I'd like to list the recommendations from the working group on acceptance and social inclusion of minorities in the Western Balkans. So first, I go to the recommendations for CSOs and the think tanks from the Western Balkans. Mobilization and engagement of minorities to participate in times of elections. Accountability of institutions which are responsible for implementation of the Poznan Declaration and the EU strategic framework. The Digital Agenda funds should ensure internet access to all of the Roma settlements in the Western Balkans. Educate the Roma community about e-services, since governments are working on a common project for provision of online services. Targeted field approach towards minorities for immunization in order to tackle the COVID-19 crisis. So I move to the recommendations for Western Balkan governments. Mainstream political parties should enable space for minorities to participate in elections as their candidates, their structures and decision-making processes. Safeguard freedom of political expression in Western Balkans, especially for minorities due to their isolation and the existing tokenism. Tailor employment measures and vocational trainings for minorities in accordance to the market demands in order to maximize the potential of the workforce. Western Balkan countries and the economic actors have to support Roma informal gray economy to transit towards the green economy. Mentorship of Roma graduates for Roma students in order to overcome the COVID-19 crisis. Digital education must be an objective of the digital agenda for involvement of the Roma children and ensuring access of digital online continuous education. Monitor and sanction discrimination from the health institutions and staff towards the Roma patients when they go for checkups or other health services. Establish instruments to allow vulnerable groups to access the EU funds and ensure that minorities participate in the process of planning. Increase the trust of Roma in public institutions to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Western Balkan countries should collect data for the purposes of the Poznan Declaration, as well as the level of vaccinated against the COVID-19. Western Balkan governments should use the potential and the capacities from the business sector and the CSOs. Utilize the opportunities to take advantage of the Western Balkans investment framework in order to improve the situation of Roma, especially in the construction of social housing. According to the UNHCR pledges and the Poznan Declaration, Western Balkan countries should ensure civil registration for minorities by 2024, safeguarding the infrastructure in the Roma settlements, such as the access to electricity and water supply. Minorities should engage in the reforestation process in order to mitigate the climate change consequences and the negative environmental impact. The recommendations for the EU and its member states. The European Union and Germany, as allies to the minorities, should invest efforts in political assistance in the Western Balkans, especially to minority participation and decision-making positions and processes. The European Union should monitor the implementation of the national laws in the Western Balkans, especially the laws covering the promotion of the minority rights. Although EU efforts have resulted with progress, still the EU must monitor the anti-Gypsyism and make sure that no one is left behind. And the last but not the least, the EU should initiate operationalization of the Poznan Declaration and monitor the progress towards meeting its objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suat. State Secretary Berger, would you have any immediate short remarks?
Yeah, thank you also to the three of you, and minority rights, yeah, I think are absolutely crucial for any democratic development, that minorities are taken into account, that they have equal rights, equal access in all areas. And I take your point that you see the necessity of having some kind of a monitoring. There is also, beyond the European Union, also the OSCE, which has a specific task of monitoring minorities, which I think is also important. My understanding is that in the framework of the Berlin process, there is going to be a ministerial meeting on the specific challenges of the Roma. So I hope that the points you have presented here can also be discussed with more depth there. When it comes to the legacies of the past, yeah, this is maybe, I don't know, the most difficult issue, and reconciliation. This is really, in my view, we can say it's a generational challenge. And I really hope that especially the young generation will be in a position to overcome stereotypes, to overcome differences, and what you said about including also in a broader sense Croatia, Slovenia. I think that is absolutely right. That needs to be done, and here we come back to the media freedom. If we don't have free media, which can have really an open discussion and information about the past, about war crimes, about the question of justice or the lack of justice, then immediately the whole discussion runs into problems. And I very much take your point about cross-border. I think we should look at programs which are not country-specific, but which are in a broader sense, and which forces people really to discuss not only the situation of their own country, but also of the past. And I agree with the point: zero tolerance against hate speech, zero tolerance against these kind of things. You know, obviously what we need on a political level, I would say, and that's where we put a lot of emphasis in now after the elections in Kosovo, is that hopefully we can use this window of time till the elections in Serbia next, I think, May, to make some progress here, that both sides will engage constructively. And in Bosnia, you might have seen that Germany has put forward a candidate for the office of the High Representative. And, you know, our idea with that is really a stronger engagement also in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the idea is really to overcome this political blockade along ethnic lines. And if we don't manage to overcome that, then I don't know how we can overcome this divisive nationalist rhetoric and politics. So it's a huge task and challenge, but it's definitely high on our agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Berger. We are now moving on to the third cluster of working groups, where we will talk about enhancing integrity compliance in infrastructure projects and digitalization of public services in terms of enhancing transparency, securing data protection. I already see Danilo, and here is Ardian as well. Ardian Hakai from the Cooperation and Development Institute will update us on what the group dealing with enhancing integrity compliance in infrastructure projects has discussed. Ardian, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you. We have been discussing of how to shift the role of civil society organizations from a watchdog to owner, basically. But first, the challenges. We face state capture. We face ineptitude of public administration. We face increasing presence of third actors. And also, we do not have for the moment a specific EU conditionality mechanism for the allocation of the economic and investment plan budget of 29 billion euros. So our recommendations are in 4 clusters. Actually, we added another cluster ourselves. The first one regarding CSOs and think tanks. We want to bring together critical mass of NGOs that are focused on monitoring, on contributing and exchanging expertise on integrity compliance and capital investment projects in Western Balkans. This is the first one, come together. The second one is that the NGOs, they must have as a key component of their work to be monitored in all their projects, the integrity compliance, anytime that they work with the public administration. Basically, there is no point to work with public administration partners without looking if they are able or if they're entitled. The second recommendation goes for Western Balkan governments. Our governments or government institutions that are in charge of infrastructure should complete the adoption of integrity compliance plans as per national strategies, the EU obligations, and also international best practice. Specialized NGOs should have observer status at National Investment Committee. Is the committee who decides which projects need to be financed or not. And also governments need to have obligatory consultation with civil society organizations on laws that impact infrastructure. Basically, we do not want any more special laws. They are very harmful for our budget and for our economy and democracy. Third, recommendations for EU and its member states. Basically, State Secretary, we would like very much to mainstream integrity compliance into the economic and investment plan and the 10 flagship projects. And actually, integrity compliance is also a conclusion of the Sofia summit last year. Second, we want integrity compliance to be part of conditionality for the EU support of infrastructure project in Western Balkans. And we want the EU to regularly check if the institutions in charge of infrastructure are implementing their obligation regarding integrity. Second, we want we want representative from NGOs, centers of excellence, NGOs that prove that are worthy, to have an observer status at Western Balkans investment framework meetings. We want to see what's going on because we want to be closer to the information and have better transparency. And we want that a long-term support for the civil society organizations that are involved in integrity compliance, not short-term, but long-term support. Infrastructure projects have a very long life cycle. And we want this support to be part of the functioning budget of the WBIF. They have a big budget for consultancy. We would like a smaller budget for civil society organizations. Fourth, for other actors, for international financial institutions, we would like them to provide accessible, adapted, and updated information for citizen and civil society or the infrastructure project that they finance. They provide it, but it's quite difficult actually to get access to it. We want it to be much better organized and useful for us. And second, and the last point, we want for IFIs and also for the development agencies that Germany has, Denmark has, or bilateral development agencies to provide long-term support with expertise and financial resources to civil society organizations that are involved in monitoring integrity compliance in infrastructure projects. Thank you, that was all.
Thank you, Adrian. We now move on to Danilo Krivokapic from the Share Foundation, who's going to update us on the work of the working group on digitalization in public services. Danilo, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Simonida, so much. Just want to say hi to all the panelists and attendees, and special thanks to Secretary Berger for supporting this forum. So I'm going to talk a bit more about what was discussed in our group, because these are a bit more emerging issues than the other one that we heard here. So I'm going to start with a cliche, and that's that there are no longer borders between material and digital world. This became evident to everybody since pandemic started, and everybody had to adjust to live in this digital world, and that's what government did even before pandemic. So all of governments in the Western Balkans are making strong digitalization effort. They are trying to get more data from the citizens, but also to help them improve all of these services. This is also important for our EU integration road, because in the Western Balkan Summit in Sofia, there was a consensus reached that these efforts are necessary in order to bring the region closer to the EU path. So, and there are many good things with digitalization of e-services, but there are also some which are not so great. So when we talked from all countries, we could hear many examples of massive data breaches, data leaks, and what's worrying in this situation is that accountability is always missing. There are no penalties when this is happening, and sometimes this is just the matter of what we call clumsy digitalization, let's say good intentions with little or no knowledge, but sometimes we are talking about this inherent need of government to have and misuse information in some cases. What is very important is legal framework when we're talking about data protection. So European Union gave us great standard GDPR. So it's not just that we are on the road to EU that we need to adopt laws like GDPR, but GDPR is the golden standard in this field, and many of the countries already adopted laws in line with GDPR. Other ones have that in their agendas, but implementations of these rules and enforcement of these rules is always a big problem, and we need to work on that. On the other hand, I would just like to mention a few of the opportunities and challenges when we are talking about digitalization in public sector. One of them is digital literacy. There is no comprehensive analysis on how digital literate are citizens in the Western Balkans, but also what are the needs for them in order to use digital services. Also, the big opportunity when you're talking about digitalization is open data, information in open format. So on one hand, the governments are not publishing open data enough, but there is also a problem on demand side. So we in the civil sector, journalists, we don't know still what to do with this data. And at the end, the very big problem is user centricity of the services. So these services needs to be built so that people can use them. So some government service needs to be at least as good as, I don't know, e-banking, which everyone is using and can understand how it's used. I'm going to go just briefly through the recommendations. I'm not going to read them all, but when we are talking about recommendations for civil societies, it's very important for us to raise internal capacities in order to understand and deal with the issues related to digitalization. But what is also very important, we should strive to work together on a regional level in all these issues, because all these issues in our countries are rather similar, and there are already some initiatives working jointly on digital rights. For the government, let me just point out a few. As I said, governments should adopt comprehensive legal framework in the field of digitalization and data protection in line with EU standards, but as well as common standards for developing e-services, guidelines for this optimization and implementation for the government. Other than that, it's very important that government should be guided by the principles of data protection and by design and by default when designing e-services. Comprehensive risk analysis and impact assessment procedures should be undertaken and at various stages of design and development. And lastly, for the EU, I believe that the EU should continue to set golden standards for tackling emerging issues in the use of advanced technology. At the moment, as I know, regulation of on AI is in the process, which is very important. And the other thing is that EU should insist on the same level of accountability in the cases of data protections violations and incidents in our countries as for the member states, which is something that some of the other panelists already mentioned. So thank you.
Thank you, Danilo. Before I give the opportunity to Secretary Berger, I just want to encourage the attendees of the event, because we have more than 60 besides the panelists, that it seems we will have time at the end in our agenda for questions and comments. So if you want to write them in advance, if you already have questions, please do write them in the question and answer sessions. or we can shortly include you to pose an audio question, possibly at the end of the fourth cluster that will follow. Sorry to have interrupted you, Secretary Berger. If you would like to respond on the integrity, compliance, and the digital agenda, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And you know, before taking this job, I was the Director General here for Economic Affairs, so I had a lot to do with infrastructure projects, and I very much understand your point, and I really see also the necessity of a strong, very strong role, I would say, not only of civil society organizations, but also of independent media in monitoring these investment processes into infrastructure. And a lot depends, obviously, on, I think you mentioned it yourself, the question of transparency of processes. So, for example, in Germany, if we have an infrastructure project, the government has to present it publicly, and then there is a certain time span for public debate about it, where a normal citizen, NGOs, everybody can come in and move the discussion. And also the question of who were the bidders, are all the elements of a bidding process, are they transparent? The question of anti-corruption, all of that is crucial. And then again, here we go to the question of independent media, of rule of law, of strong institutions in the area of anti-corruption. And so I think, yes, this is an issue also for the European Union. When it comes to infrastructure, I think we always have to look, or should look, at the added value for the whole region. So if we speak about energy, the question of interconnectors, how can energy systems be connected, road infrastructure, railway infrastructure. So how can we really make a gain, not only for the country, but for the region overall? And obviously, to be in a position to monitor that effectively, a civil society organization needs a high degree of very specific knowledge. And so I understand your point. I don't know if there is the possibility of financial support. I think it would be helpful, but it would also be helpful to connect to those NGOs, for example, here in Germany, in other parts of the European Union, who are active in this field. Because my experience, for example, from the energy sector is you're only then effective if you have the in-depth knowledge. And that is maybe a little bit more than a civil society organization. It needs a little something like a think tank structure in order to have an understanding of energy systems, of infrastructure. But your point is very important. Digitalization, yeah. And here I always say, look at one of the smallest member states of the European Union, Estonia, which is #1 on digitalization, which shows to me that a government which is dedicated to move that issue forward and to offer digital services to their citizens in a reliable and responsible way can achieve a lot. And Estonia has shown that it's easier to do that than in a bigger country like Germany. And I think to overcome this question of maybe a lack of digital literacy that needs obviously investments in the necessary education, data protection, a very big issue, where, as you have said, I mean, the European Union is the standard setting in the world, I would say, on data protection. And that shows that if you make good laws and are able to implement them, that you can do a lot. So here, I think accountability, what you mentioned, data breaches, a very big concern. also here. I mean, the whole discussion we have about the regulation of platforms, which is a big debate. How can we hold them accountable for their content? Artificial intelligence you mentioned. So I would say in Germany, this is an ongoing process, an ongoing discussion, and whatever we can do here to support the digitalization in the Western Balkans, we should do that, because this is an investment in the future.
Thank you, Secretary Berger. We now move on to the fourth cluster of the working groups, with a topic that I think is very close to everyone's hearts, which deals with the green agenda. We have three speakers, one on energy transition, air pollution, and biodiversity and nature conservation. Nihat Harbas from the Regional Center for Sustainable Energy Transition will be the first speaker, and Nihat, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simonida. Thank you, State Secretary Berger, for having us here and an opportunity to present our thoughts regarding the energy transition in the Western Balkan countries. So within this working group, which consisted of experts and activists from civil society organization and think tanks, we have discussed and elaborate how to strengthen the regional cooperation between civil society organizations. And the idea was to exchange actually the best practices for the approaching the energy transition in the region. Within the group, we have focused on green agenda for the Western Balkans and discussed the regional transition from, first of all, coal and other fossil fuels such as natural gas to renewable energy sources, as well as its potential and strategies for enhancing energy efficiency as a first. We have identified most important issue in energy transition process and prepare more than 50 policy recommendation for Forum 2, focusing on three main areas, which already have been presented: CSOs, think tanks, Western Balkan governments, and of course EU and member states. Some of them I will present now due to time, and most of them we will actually have in writing. So the recommendation for civil society and think tanks would be to continue to point out non-transparent work and corrupt actions in the field of energy, to achieve the accountability of public authorities and the rule of law, which has been mentioned several times. Then cooperate with private sector in order to increase advocacy for appropriate policies, not just the public sectors, and involve media in the process, because we have a lot of dialogue on politics, on other topics, but not so much in energy transition topics, which is, from our point of view, very important. Then to expand utilization of legal tools and instruments for the exposing the responsible politicians and economic actors actually to the legal and social responsibilities, such as Energy Community, Aarhus Convention, UN, and etc. Talking about the governments, we think that the governments should put the energy transition to the permanent and priority agenda on political activities, given that that transition will have a significant impact on the transformation of the society and social relation in coming period. Energy transition towards renewables, focusing on upscaling solar and wind, first of all, and avoid stranded assets in new fossil fuels projects, especially in coal and of course in natural gas. Include all social actors in defining goals, priorities, the ordinary citizens as well, and plan activities to the energy transition process. Then create the policies and funds protecting not just jobs, but workers in this energy transition coal region especially, and set up the dates for coal phase out, because we still don't have the exact date for coal phase out. And of course, abolish regulatory and administrative barriers for renewable energy development. Just one interesting, for constructing, for example, wind farm project, you have to obtain more than 150 permits, which is definitely taking the time, 10 years maybe. And recommendation for EU, some of them intensify the efforts to combat issue of corruption, which have been mentioned several times, clientelism as well, and lack of transparency, and more closely integrate this effort with the activities surrounding generally the green agenda. Compliance with EU laws and policies, in our point of view, must be a basic condition for all international donors' assistance, whatever donor fund the development of strategic document or development of some specific document or other donor support. The EU should present itself as a credible partner by supporting the region with effective and robust financing structure that can offset funding for fossil fuels in the region, such as from China, for example. And then strict monitoring on use EU taxpayer funds, transfer of knowledge, which you already mentioned, from EU to Balkan countries, which will be more than welcome. And last, less carrot, more stick. Thank you.
Thank you, Nihat. We now, from energy, move on to air pollution, and I would like to invite Alexandra Tomanic from the European Fund for the Balkans to address us.
Thank you very much, Simonida. I'm representing not only the European Fund for the Balkans, but also the Balkans United for Clean Air Network. Well, Mr. State Secretary, you said in your introductory words that we are here trying to find answers to questions of everyday life and to improve everyday life. When we speak about air, it can't be more everyday, it can't be more fundamental. We are living in the most polluted area of this continent. We face tremendous air pollution. Our cities figure among the global top 10 most polluted cities on Earth. According to data of the World Health Organization, yearly we have approximately 14,000 deaths that can directly be linked to air pollution. So this is really not only a burning issue, but this is a very fundamental issue that is important to each and every one of us. For the civil society, therefore, we think that we need to see it as really the cross-cutting topic that urgently needs to be addressed. We have tremendous experts, but also others. We have had a campaign, a very successful awareness-raising campaign, because we think that awareness and knowledge is the fundamental of actually being able to ask for accountability. We speak about air pollution in a level that it goes really to the core function of any state of being able to protect its citizens. So awareness-raising campaigns, work with media, and really educating the citizenry of what it means to have these numbers outside. The governments, it has been mentioned in all the other topics, they remain silent. They don't include the experts that are there. They don't listen neither to the expert community nor to civil society. We are aware that even the administrative capacities and the knowledge within the institutions is low, but there is a lot of knowledge available outside the institutions, but that knowledge is not being seen as knowledge of allies, but it's been framed as attacking progress and so on. So it's a very weird situation where we even have the situation that there are laws in place on the national level and that there are international obligations and that both are being breached. So we definitely need your help and your focus on the situation on the ground, but also on civil society that is there, but somehow fighting a very lonely fight. The EU needs to include the Western Balkans in all its future climate activities and targets, because they will not be reachable or not have any sense if the part of the continent polluting most and having heavily emissions above all international target lines is left outside. We would also like to see some sort of zero pollution conditionality when it comes to financing mechanisms now being prepared for the green agenda, and maybe also have them when it comes to the instrument for pre-accession. We just really need you to help, and please do follow up what happens in the aftermath of these big international meetings, because that is a big problem we see for all the topics. Whatever is necessary is signed on the international stage, but back home, the situation looks really, unfortunately, very different. We have a number of recommendations, especially to the national governments, that go more into some procedural or technical issues, which I will not mention here. They will be available in written, but please just be aware of the situation that we are facing here and help us wherever you can to at least follow up and ask the questions that are not being heard when we ask them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you for reminding me that to answer to State Secretary Berger, that we will provide all of these inputs in a written form, because it was mentioned before. And thanks for also reminding us that you come also on behalf of the campaign Balkans United for Clean Air, because it's something that I think has remained in a lot of our ears and minds. Last on the green agenda, I would like to invite Natasha Trnkovic from the Center for Environment to update us on the discussions on biodiversity and nature conservation. Natasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simonida. Thank you, Secretary Berger, and thanks for all attendees. I will present the recommendation that we developed in the Biodiversity and Nature Conservation Working Group. As I guess we are all aware, biodiversity is a huge threat globally, and there are many efforts with not so big results. Unfortunately, Western Balkan is not any exception. So biodiversity is really threatened in our region too. However, we still have opportunity to protect our pristine forests, our free-flowing rivers, still unpolluted soil, and all other resources that we still have and that are still to a large extent in better conditions than in the rest of the Europe. Also, we have quite stable populations and really good and healthy habitats of many wildlife species. By protecting the nature, of course, we are not protecting only flora, fauna, and fungi, but also we protect people, we protect their communities, also their economies, that we often forget how closely it is connected, habitats, traditions, and also, of course, potential to develop in a sustainable way. Recommendations, as all of my colleagues, I'll present in different clusters. So first are those that are recommendations for CSOs and think tanks. And of course, I'll just highlight a few of them. CSOs working on the nature conservation should take part in the development of the action plan and roadmaps for the implementation of the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans that will be coordinated by the Regional Cooperation Council. In this regard, we'll also, as a group of organizations that are working strongly on the national level, also on the regional level, we will encourage local CSOs to take an active part. And then to strengthen BioNet network that is existing and really good, positive example of the networking in the region, but also other relevant networks like CNET and different coalitions 27 that are active in the region. To involve in the development of the regional biodiversity strategy, but also all other relevant processes, to publish a regional shadow report on the implementation of the biodiversity policies and the general progress with the coordination of the already mentioned BioNet network members. And then to keep its, of course, already well-known watchdog role as in all other policymaking and negotiation processes. Recommendations for the Western Balkan governments are to have professional staff in the protected areas and in scientific governmental institutions, and they should be merit-based and adequately qualified, receiving the regular trainings. We, of course, all of us, we really often mention the lack of capacities but to some extent we cannot ignore it anymore, and we really seek the really good and quick measures in this regard. Then to appoint relevant and qualified focal points for the nature related conventions. This is also really crucial topic. Then to increase the intersectoral cooperation by organizing a roundtable on the sustainable farming and biodiversity in the biodiversity important areas, not only protected areas. To introduce the financial scheme, green direct payments, which support farmers who adopt and maintain environment and climate-friendly farming. Moratorium on hydropower plants across the Western Balkans. I guess this is really ongoing and really present topic, so I don't think that I should elaborate this more. And there are also in different countries, there are different initiatives that are going in direction of moratorium or a total ban on hydropower energy, increasing the quality and the standard for the environmental impact assessment, but also for the involvement of CSOs. To increase percentage of the protected areas by 30% in accordance with the UN new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and also EU Biodiversity Strategy until 2030. To have fully transposition of the Habitat and Birds directives in the national legislation, to improve sectoral cooperation and maintain mainstreaming of biodiversity in the sectoral policies like energy, agriculture, water management, forestry, spatial planning, and etc. And to recognize and value the contribution of civil society organizations in the nature conservation sector and to enhance opportunities for them to participate in decision-making processes. And then last but not least, definitely recommendations for the EU, its member states to recognize and support the work of national conservation CSOs and regional networks, to sanction Western Balkan governments when not responding or not giving the adequate answers to, for example, Berne Convention or other convention secretariats. To strengthen the European Commission's monitoring on nature protection in Western Balkan countries and to provide more effective support to Western Balkan governments in order to achieve EU standards in biodiversity conservation and public participation in decision-making without further delays. And to create mechanism for EU investments in the Western Balkans in order to secure that those will boost the biodiversity and nature conservation, not threaten them. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. I know this is the last group, but I would like to, and Natasha was concerned that whether she would have the time, but we were very disciplined. I would like now to give the floor to Secretary Berger to respond to this cluster. And then I will pose a couple of questions that we've also collected for your concluding remarks. But for first, the cluster on the green agenda.
Yeah, thank you also to the three of you. And I must admit that I was not aware about how serious the question of air pollution is. So that was really an important point. And you know, we just approved in the European Union now the necessary funding for this recovery program to get out of the COVID crisis. And as I'm sure you know that the full focus will be on digital, but more than that on green recovery, in the sense that we don't want to use the money to go back to the old industrial structures, but we want to invest in the new ones. And I've seen that, for example, in your region, 80% of the energy is still carbon-based. So the challenge is huge. And obviously, and I know that from the debate we have here in Germany, which has also not been very easy over the last 20, 30 years, that you need to convince people. And obviously the question of jobs is a very important one. So how to do a green transition without losing public support when it comes to energy prices, when it comes to jobs, because all transformation processes create fears, create concerns. And for example, here in Germany, we have taken the decision now to phase out coal, but the same will happen in coal-relying countries like Poland and others, where the impact will be even much stronger. So we need a policy which offers then new opportunities, new possibilities, in order not to lose public support on that. And overall, you know, my feeling is that with the new US administration, they coming back to the Paris Climate Agreement, that the fact that we have now a growing international alliance to get out of the financing of coal power plants. And the last two to join yesterday were 2 days ago, Korea and Japan. So it's only China which is left. The fact that we all want to become climate neutral till 2050. All of that will generate a power of transformation which will affect all the areas you mentioned. And I'm sure that with, for example, the EU investment plan and many other instruments, this transformation which is going to take place within the European Union will definitely have a positive impact on the Western Balkans. When it comes to the challenges on the ground, yes, energy efficiency, very important. Also emission trading systems. I think that is something that needs to be built up. But it's interesting to see that the cross-cutting issue of what we are discussing today is always accountability. It's always the rule of law. It's always the possibility that civil society is included in the processes, that civil society is heard, and that transparency in the processes is increased. But also what you mentioned when you spoke about biodiversity, the question of adequate staffing. You need people who really have an expertise on the different issues in order to take the right policy decisions. And biodiversity is obviously also here a big issue and not an easy one. How to balance the interests of agriculture with the interest of maintaining biodiversity. And this is a tough fight between different positions, where civil society, at least here in Germany, is playing really a crucial role. So I would really seeing also the spirit you have, the work you are doing, I think very important, and some of you mentioned it, the networking within the region, but also the networking with think tanks and civil society organizations within the European Union. But I must say on all 3 points, I would say I am pretty optimistic that the push which will come out of the international debate of the transformation within the European Union will have a fundamental positive impact also on the Western Balkans.
Thank you, Secretary Berger. We are very wary of your time, but before I give you the concluding remarks, I would like to thank all of the colleagues that presented the work of the working groups, also all of the participants. We have more than 70 with us today. I think for us, this is, I think from all of the presentation, you got the sense of how important this exchange is for us. And I would like just to ask you in your concluding remarks, if you can maybe give us, although you hinted a bit on it, recommendations on how we can maybe present these issues better to EU-based stakeholders from looking from the outside in. And there was a specific question that from Miguel Lazarevic, if you can reflect whether Germany would support the inclusion of the Western Balkans in the representative strand of the Convention on the Future of Europe, in addition to the civil society side, because we understand that it is very important for governments to be observers, active observers in these discussions with their EU peers. Now the how long your concluding remarks will be depend on you, because we are also very of your time, but thank you very much. And just so that everyone knows, after Secretary Berger, we will hand over for a minute or two to Valeska to wrap up, so do not leave. Secretary Berger, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I must say, I really enjoyed this 1.5 hours of discussion on these many topics, and it was interesting for me to see that many of the concerns you have, of the issues you discuss, are absolutely the same as we are discussing internally, although you have the additional challenges, I would say, and this is, I think, something we have to take very serious on, what we can do to strengthen the voice of the citizens, the voice of the civil society in the processes. And as I said before, if you look at the different areas we have discussed today, it really comes down to some basic questions, which is the participation of civil society in the decision-making processes. The role of parliaments was mentioned, the role of the media, of independent media, the role of cooperation within the region, the question of rule of law, of anti-corruption, of accountability in general. And so it shows really very clearly, this discussion today, where the focus has to lie. And if you have accountability in general in a government, then it immediately affects all areas. So I would say it would be very positive if from your 10 working groups you would make these recommendations in a written form. And I would suggest not to go into too many details. Really highlight in the 10 areas, what are your, I don't know, 5, 6, maximum 10 key concerns. And really also with a political view. And this is something that we can then try to work with. And Conference of the Future of Europe, yes, I mean, the point is the mandate is done. So the governments which participate are from the member states, but the debate is with civil society. And I have heard now from different sides, and we share that, the need to include the Western Balkans and all the areas you addressed here. Many of them relate to the questions we want to discuss in this process on the future of Europe, because the basic question we want to discuss there is, what kind of Europe, of European Union, do we want to have in 10, 15 years? Where do we want to stay on green transition, on strategic autonomy? What can we do to be in 15 years still an independent actor when it comes to our economy, to our health systems? What can we do not to be dependent from China, from other important international actors, and maintain the capacity of Europe and the European Union to be an independent international actor? And as I said, many of the issues I think we have discussed today have a lot to do with this debate on the Conference of the Future of Europe. So we are going to see how we can do it. This process ends in the French presidency in spring next year. So I hope that we can organize and find a way how to include all of you in this debate. But thank you very much, really, for the invitation. It was also for me very interesting to hear your concerns and your suggestions, and really all the best, and you can count on our support for your future work.
Thank you for your kind words. We release you off duty 4 minutes late, and now I can hand over to Valeska.
Thank you very much, Simonida, and thank you to all of you. What a rich panel and insight into your work over the past years. And as was mentioned before, we will receive all of the results and put them together in one document and share it throughout. And on behalf of our team of organizers from Southeast Europe Association, Aspen, Germany, I would like to really use this opportunity also from our side to thank you, State Secretary Berger, for taking the time and for providing feedback on the recommendations that civil society organizations from across the region have worked on over the past days. We, as Simonida said, we are mindful of your time, so please feel free to leave even before the official conclusion of this panel. Thank you very much once again. I would also like to use this opportunity to thank all of the facilitators of the working groups for the work that you put into the preparations, not only of the working groups themselves, but also the summary of the recommendations. And you have contributed the papers that everyone can find in the library, and this will also remain open throughout the next week. So if you haven't had a chance yet, you can still have a look. Simonida, I would really like to thank you once again for jumping into this panel at the very last minute. Thank you for taking this responsibility. I would like to thank the German Chancellery and especially the Foreign Office, not only for entrusting us with the organization of this forum, but also the support that they have given us throughout the process of the preparations. I would like to thank European Western Balkans for serving as media partner for the forum. I would like to thank all speakers and moderators who have been part of the panels throughout the past 2 days. I would also like to use this opportunity to thank the creator and host of this great platform. I don't know if he's hearing us as well, but Gaston Geilenkuten, we are very happy with what you set up, and I think this has been great. I would like to thank Victoria Palm, Tina Boris, and Richard Kaufmann, who have been in the background invisibly the past 2 days, making sure everything runs smoothly. And I dare say I would like to most importantly thank Yannick Remme, who was the person where all the threads of the preparations have been coming together in the past weeks. Thank you so much for the great job that you have done. Thanks to every single one of you for your participation. And as mentioned already yesterday, please keep your login information. You can already find the first recordings of panels that you might have missed on the platform now, and they will be completed shortly. Moreover, the second part of this year's Civil Society and Think Tank Forum will take place on July 5th right here, and you will be able to reuse your access to this platform to participate in it. As the conference on the future of Europe was mentioned several times, there is also still a lot of room for your ideas on the idea board that we have integrated on the conference on the future of Europe. The reason why we have this board is that we have observed a high interest in the region, and it was expressed several times today again, of being involved in the conference on the future of Europe. And while we, of course, cannot change the scope of this official process, we do agree that ideas coming from the region should also be heard. Therefore, we are planning to feed these ideas into the official channels of the Conference on the Future of Europe on behalf of the region, as a way of including also your ideas coming from the region. We will also take these ideas as a basis to see what else it is that we as organizers of this forum can do on our end about this. So we will keep this idea board open until the end of next week, and would be very happy to see all of you take the time also to share your ideas on the board. You can access it by either clicking on the plane or on the picture, or by choosing the ideas Future of Europe in the menu. We really hope that to have all of you with us again in July. And with that, I have the pleasure of closing the first part of this year's Civil Society and Think Tank Forum. Thank you very much once again, and have a great afternoon.